The child no one wanted. The summer sun beat down on the wooden platform like a hammer on an anvil, and 3-year-old Lily May stood in the center of it all, barefoot, silent, clutching a filthy stuffed bear with one button eye missing. The auctioneer's voice carried across the town square, but no hands rose from the crowd. They saw what he saw: a damaged child, too thin, too quiet, too broken to be worth the trouble. Going once? Going twice? The gavel began its descent toward a life sentence in the territorial institution. Then a voice cut through the heat like a knife through butter. "I'll take her." Welcome to a story about the moment everything changed, when one man's choice rewrote a child's destiny. Stay with us until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so we can see how far Lily's story travels across the world. The town of Redemption Flats, Montana Territory, had seen its share of summer auctions, but the crowd that gathered in the square on that blistering July afternoon in 1883 came for merchandise, not miracles. Wagons lined the dusty streets. Horses stood hip-shot in whatever shade they could find. The mercantile had opened its doors wide, hoping to catch the overflow of people with money burning holes in their pockets. But the platform in the center of the square wasn't for livestock or furniture. It was for children. Orphan auctions had become common enough in the territories, a practical solution, they called it, to the problem of too many parentless children and too few institutions willing to house them. The territory didn't have the resources of the eastern states. Out here, a child either found a family or found a grave. The auction was supposed to be the humane option. Lily May didn't know about humane options. She only knew that her feet hurt from standing on the hot wood, that her stomach was empty again, and that the bear in her arms smelled like the basement where she'd been kept for the past 6 months. She was 3 years old, though she looked younger. Hunger had a way of stealing inches from a child. Her dress, if the gray sack could be called that, hung loose on her frame, stained with things best not examined too closely. Her dark hair had been cropped short, uneven, as if someone had taken shears to it without bothering to look. Her eyes, large and brown, stared out at the crowd with the kind of emptiness that made grown men look away. The auctioneer, a round man named Chester Paulson, didn't look at her much either. He'd learned early in his career that eye contact with the merchandise made the job harder. "Lot 17, he called out, consulting his ledger. "Female child, approximately 3 years of age. Healthy enough, quiet disposition." He paused and the crowd shifted. Everyone knew what quiet disposition meant in a child this young. It meant broken. "We'll start the bidding at $5. $5 for a future housemaid, gentlemen. Someone to help your wives with the washing. $5? Silence answered him. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered to her husband, who shook his head firmly. A rancher in the back spat tobacco juice into the dirt and turned away. A merchant's wife studied the child for a long moment, then wrinkled her nose and looked elsewhere. "Come now," Paulson tried again, forcing cheer into his voice. $5 is nothing for a child who'll work for years. Think of the value. $4? Anyone?" More silence. Lily May's fingers tightened on the bear. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She'd been on platforms before, in basements, in rooms with locked doors, and men who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. She knew what it meant when people looked at you and then looked away. It meant you weren't good enough. It meant no one wanted you. It meant the pain would continue. $3, Paulson said, and now desperation crept into his tone. "Surely someone can spare $3. She's young enough to train properly. Moldable, you might say." A few people in the crowd exchanged glances. A farmer named Bill Henderson leaned toward his wife. "Mike could use help in the kitchen," he muttered. His wife, Sarah, a thin woman with kind eyes, looked at the child on the platform and felt her throat tighten. "Bill, look at her. She's terrified. What's been done to that baby?" "Ain't our concern," Bill said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We got 4 of our own to feed." Sarah nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on Lily May. The child hadn't moved, hadn't cried, hadn't made a sound. That wrongness of it settled in Sarah's chest like a stone. $2. Paulson's voice had gone sharp now. $2, and I'll throw in the blanket she came with. Final offer before she goes back to the territorial home. The territorial home. Everyone knew what that meant. The place where children went when no one wanted them. The place with bars on the windows and locks on the doors. The place where childhood went to die in 18-hour work shifts and bowls of watery gruel. Still, no hands rose. Paulson sighed and reached for his gavel. Very well. Lot 17 will be returned to... I'll take her. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and rough as gravel, and every head turned. The man who pushed through the gathered people stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. He wore a black hat pulled low, dark trousers, and a shirt that had seen better days but was clean. His boots were expensive, custom-made, someone would note later, but worn from actual use. His face was weathered, tanned dark from years under the Montana sky, with lines around his eyes that spoke of either laughter or pain. Hard to tell which, but it was his eyes that made people step aside. Gray as a winter sky, cold as mountain snow, and carrying the kind of emptiness that came from loss so profound it carved canyons in a man's soul. Ethan Cole. The name rippled through the crowd in whispers. He owned the largest ranch in 3 territories, they said, raised the finest horses in Montana. Hadn't been seen in town in nearly 5 years, not since his wife died, not since the baby died, not since he'd buried them both on a hillside and walked away from the world. And now here he stood, looking at a broken child on a platform, and saying words no one expected. Paulson recovered first, greed overcoming surprise. "Mr. Cole, excellent, excellent. The bid is at $2, sir, if you'd care to—" "I didn't ask the price," Ethan said quietly. "I said I'll take her." "Well, yes, of course, but there is the matter of the bidding process. Protocol, you understand. Perhaps we should start at—" Ethan pulled a leather wallet from his pocket, extracted several bills, and walked to the platform. He didn't count them, didn't negotiate. He simply placed the money in Paulson's sweaty palm, more money than the man had seen in a month of auctions, and turned to the child. For the first time since being placed on the platform, Lily May moved. She took a step backward, clutching the bear tighter, her eyes enormous in her small face. Ethan stopped. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak. He simply lowered himself slowly until he was kneeling on the platform, bringing his eyes level with hers. The wood was hot enough to burn through his trousers, but he didn't move. They looked at each other, the broken man and the broken child, and something passed between them that the crowd couldn't name. Recognition, maybe, or understanding, the kind that comes when 2 people who've lived through darkness see the same shadows in each other's eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice so low only she could hear it. "And I'm not going to leave you. You understand?" Lily May didn't respond, but after a long moment, her eyes flickered to his outstretched hand, calloused, scarred, but steady, and then back to his face. "You can bring the bear," Ethan added. The smallest change came over the child's expression. Not a smile. Nothing so dramatic. Just the slightest relaxation in the rigid line of her shoulders, the death grip on the stuffed animal easing by a fraction. Ethan stood slowly and offered his hand again. This time, after hesitation that felt like eternity, Lily May reached out and placed her tiny fingers in his palm. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Ethan Cole, the man who'd locked himself away from the world, who'd spoken to no one, who'd become more ghost than human, lifted the child into his arms and walked through the parted sea of people without a backward glance. Sarah Henderson wiped her eyes with her apron. Her husband squeezed her shoulder. Paulson stared at the money in his hand, trying to calculate how much extra he'd been given and whether he should call after Cole for change. He decided against it. Something about the set of the man's shoulders suggested finality. Transaction complete. No refunds. In the back of the crowd, 2 people watched with very different reactions. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper who'd kept the Cole Ranch running for the past 5 years, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She'd been in town for supplies, had stopped to see what the commotion was about, and now witnessed her employer, her friend, do something she'd thought impossible. She gathered her skirts and hurried after him, her mind already racing through what would be needed. A child. Dear God. A child in that house again. The other watcher was a man in an expensive suit, standing in the shade of the mercantile awning. Caleb Wright, director of the Territorial Children's Home, did not look pleased. His eyes, small and sharp behind wire spectacles, followed Ethan Cole with calculation. His fingers drummed against his watch chain, a nervous habit that betrayed the controlled expression on his face. That child was meant to go back to the home, back to the basement, back to the locked rooms where she and others served purposes that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with profit. Ethan Cole had just interfered with business, expensive business. That, Caleb thought, would need to be corrected. But for now, he simply watched as the rancher carried the silent child toward a waiting horse, and he smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Ethan's ranch lay 12 miles outside Redemption Flats, tucked into a valley where the mountains met the grasslands in a sweep of impossible beauty. The house itself was built from logs and stone, 2 stories, sturdy enough to withstand Montana winters, and large enough to hold a family that had never arrived. The ride from town was quiet. Ethan had settled Lily May in front of him on the saddle, one arm around her middle, to keep her secure. She'd gone rigid at first, that terrible stillness that spoke of children who'd learned that resistance brought pain. But when he didn't tighten his grip, didn't hurt her, didn't do anything but hold her steady as the horse moved beneath them, she'd slowly relaxed. By the time they reached the ranch, she'd fallen asleep against his chest, the bear crushed between them. Margaret was waiting on the porch, having ridden hard to get there first. She was a woman of 50, strong as rope, and twice as useful, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd come to work for Ethan's father 30 years ago, had stayed through the transition of ownership, and had been the one to find Ethan after he'd buried his wife and child. She'd pulled him back from the edge of a bullet more than once in those first dark months. Now she watched him dismount with a sleeping child in his arms, and her weathered face showed every one of her years. "Her name's Lily May," Ethan said quietly, climbing the porch steps. "She'll need a room, a bath, food, clothes, everything." "Ethan," Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "What have you done? What needed doing? You can't just take a child because I paid for her." The words came out harsh, and he softened his tone. "Legally, properly. She's mine now." "Children aren't property," Margaret said, but she was already opening the door, already moving into the practical mode that had kept this household running. "Bring her to the guest room, the one that gets morning light. I'll heat water for a bath." The room Margaret indicated had been unused for years. It still held furniture from when the house had been built with the expectation of children, a small bed, a dresser, a rocking chair by the window. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale. Ethan laid Lily May on the bed, careful not to wake her. In sleep, she looked even younger. Fragile. The bear had fallen from her grip, and her hand reached for it reflexively. He placed it back in her arms and watched her fingers close around it. Margaret appeared in the doorway with an armful of linens. "I'll make up the bed proper once we've bathed her. Lord knows what she's carrying." She paused, studying the child with the practiced eye of a woman who'd raised 4 children of her own. "She's been hurt, Ethan. Bad. You can see it in how she holds herself." "I know." "This isn't going to be easy. A child like this who's been through God knows what." "I know," Ethan said again. He stood, looking down at Lily May. "But easy's not the point. Right is." Margaret's expression softened. "Your wife would have loved her." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Probably," he said after a moment. "But Catherine's gone. And this child's here. That's all that matters now." He turned and walked out, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Margaret watched him go, then looked back at the sleeping child. "Well, little one," she murmured, "welcome to the Cole Ranch. I hope you're ready for what comes next, because I don't think any of us are." Lily. May woke to the smell of food. Her eyes opened slowly, confused by the softness beneath her, the clean scent in the air, the late afternoon light streaming through a window, windows without bars, a bed, not a floor, walls that didn't smell like urine and fear. She sat up fast, clutching the bear, her heart hammering. "Where? You're awake." The voice was female, warm, but not sugary. "Good timing. I've got the bath ready, and then we'll get some food in you." Lily May's head whipped toward the doorway where a gray-haired woman stood holding a stack of towels. Not the man from the platform. Someone new. Someone who might... Her breath came faster. Her fingers dug into the bear's matted fur. Margaret saw it immediately. The panic. The preparation for pain. She'd seen it before in animals that had been beaten. The way they'd coil up inside themselves, expecting the blow. "Hey now," she said softly, staying in the doorway. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. My name's Margaret. I take care of this house and the stubborn man who owns it. And starting today, I'm going to take care of you too. If you'll let me." Lily May stared at her, unblinking. "I know you've probably heard that before," Margaret continued, slowly kneeling down so she wasn't looming. Promises from grown folks that turned out to be lies. But here's the truth, plain and simple. Mr. Cole, that's the man who brought you here. He doesn't lie. Neither do I. When we say you're safe, we mean it. The child's breathing slowed slightly, but she didn't speak. "Now, I've got a nice warm bath ready for you. There's soap that smells like lavender, clean towels, and after, there's bread and butter and cold milk. Real milk, not the watered-down swill they serve in those places. You don't have to say anything or do anything except let me help. Can you do that?" Silence. Margaret waited. She'd learned long ago that silence was its own kind of conversation. You just had to learn to listen. You understand? You say no, and it means no. The concept seemed foreign to the child, but slowly, carefully, she nodded. They compromised. Margaret washed Lily May's face, her hands, her feet. The water turned gray immediately. The child's skin, once clean, showed bruises in various stages of healing, fingerprints on her arms, marks on her back visible through the thin fabric. Margaret had to excuse herself twice to breathe through the rage that threatened to choke her. By the time they finished, Lily May was wearing a clean nightgown, 3 sizes too big, but soft, and her hair had been carefully combed. Margaret had found lice and dealt with them efficiently, the child never making a sound even when it must have hurt. "You're doing so well," Margaret told her. "So brave. Now let's get some food in you." The kitchen was the heart of the house, a large room with a cast-iron stove, wooden counters worn smooth from years of use, and windows that looked out over the valley. The evening light painted everything gold. Ethan was sitting at the table when they entered. He'd cleaned up, changed his shirt, but his eyes still carried that careful wariness of a man approaching something he might break. He watched as Margaret settled Lily May into a chair, placing a plate in front of her, bread with real butter, sliced apples, cold chicken, milk in a glass. The child stared at it like it might disappear, like it might be a trick. "It's yours," Ethan said quietly. "All of it. Eat what you want. What you don't finish, we'll save." Lily May looked at him, then at Margaret, then back at the food. Slowly she reached for the bread. Her hands shook as she lifted it to her mouth. She took the smallest bite possible, chewed carefully, swallowed. Then she waited. Ethan and Margaret exchanged glances. Waited for what? Permission? Punishment? "Keep going," Margaret said gently. "Eat your fill." The next bite was slightly larger. Then another. Then Lily May was eating with the desperate efficiency of a child who'd learned that food could be taken away at any moment. She shoved bread into her mouth, gulped milk so fast she choked, grabbed the chicken with both hands. "Slow down, baby," Margaret murmured. "It's not going anywhere. I promise." But Lily May couldn't slow down. Her body had its own wisdom, its own survival instinct. Food meant life. Food was uncertain. Food had to be consumed immediately. She ate until the plate was empty, then looked around for more with wild eyes. Margaret started to rise, but Ethan caught her arm. "Wait," he said quietly. They watched as Lily May's face changed, as the reality of a full stomach hit her system. Her eyes grew heavy. Her hands, still clutching the empty glass, began to tremble. Then she vomited. Everything came back up in a violent rush onto the clean floor. Immediately, the child scrambled from the chair and dropped to her knees, her whole body shaking. She pressed her forehead to the floor, arms over her head, waiting for the beating that always came after making a mess. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan pushed back from the table and moved, not toward the child, but to grab a towel. He cleaned the floor quickly, efficiently, then knelt a few feet from Lily May. "Nobody's going to hit you," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. You got sick because you ate too fast. That's all. It happens. You're not in trouble. Lily May didn't move, didn't lift her head. Look at me, Ethan said. Please. After an eternity, the child raised her head. Her face was streaked with tears. She hadn't made a sound crying. Her eyes held absolute certainty that pain was coming. You're not in trouble, Ethan repeated, each word deliberate. You will never be hit in this house. Ever. For anything. Do you understand? Lily May stared at him. I need you to understand, Ethan pressed. Nobody here will hurt you. Not for making a mess. Not for breaking something. Not for crying or screaming or anything else. This is your home now, and homes are supposed to be safe. The child's lower lip trembled. A sound escaped her, small, wounded, the first noise she'd made since arriving. Not quite a sob. More like the ghost of one. Margaret moved then, slowly, and gathered the tiny body into her arms. Lily May went stiff, then slowly relaxed into the embrace. Her face pressed against Margaret's shoulder, and she cried, silently, the way children learn to cry when sound brings punishment. Ethan stood and walked to the window, his hands gripping the sill hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Behind him, Margaret rocked the broken child and hummed a wordless tune. And somewhere in the house, a clock ticked away the seconds of a day that had changed everything. 3 days passed. 3 days of careful circling, of boundaries being established, of trust being built one microscopic piece at a time. Lily May didn't speak. Not a word. Margaret wasn't sure if she couldn't or wouldn't, but either way, the silence held. The child moved through the house like a ghost, never touching anything without permission, never asking for anything, eating tiny amounts at regular intervals as her stomach learned to accept food again. She slept in the small bed with the bear, and every morning Margaret would find her awake but motionless, waiting for someone to tell her what to do. Ethan watched it all with the patience of a man who'd spent years training wild horses. He knew you couldn't force trust. You could only create the conditions for it and wait. On the 4th morning, something changed. Margaret was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard it. A crash from the parlor, then silence. She ran, her heart in her throat, and found Lily May standing frozen beside an overturned side table. A kerosene lamp lay shattered on the floor, oil spreading across the wood. The child's face was white. Her entire body shook, her eyes fixed on the mess with absolute horror. "It's okay," Margaret said quickly, moving toward her. "It's just a lamp. We can clean—" Lily May bolted. She ran for the corner of the room and pressed herself into it, making herself as small as possible, her arms over her head in that terrible, familiar position. Margaret started forward, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "I've got this." He'd come from the barn, drawn by the noise. Now he walked slowly into the parlor, assessed the situation, and moved to the corner, not toward Lily May, but to sit down on the floor about 6 feet from her, his back against the wall. "That lamp was older than dirt," he said conversationally, as if he were talking to the air. "Ugly thing, too. My mother hated it, but my father insisted on keeping it, said it reminded him of his bachelor days. I've been meaning to get rid of it for years." Lily May didn't move, but her breathing changed slightly. "In fact," Ethan continued, "you did me a favor. Now I don't have to feel guilty about throwing it out. So thank you." Silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, a sound, a hiccup of breath that might have been the start of a sob. "You know what the first thing I ever broke in this house was?" Ethan said. "I was about 7. Knocked over my mother's favorite vase, real crystal, cost a fortune. I was terrified. Thought I was going to get whipped for sure." He paused, remembering. "My father came in, looked at the mess, looked at me. And you know what he said? He said, 'Son, things can be replaced, children can't. Are you hurt?' That was all that mattered to him. Not the vase. Me." Lily May's arms lowered slightly. "So here's the rule in this house," Ethan said firmly. "Things break. That's what things do. And when they break, we clean them up and we move on. No punishments, no beatings, no locked rooms, just we clean up and we move on." He stood slowly, walked to the closet and retrieved a broom and dustpan. Then, while Lily May watched from the corner, he carefully swept up the broken glass and cleaned the oil from the floor. When he finished, he looked at her. All done. Crisis over. Now, I believe Margaret was making flapjacks. You hungry? The child stared at him. Her dark eyes were enormous in her small face, searching his for the lie, the trick, the moment when the kindness would crack and reveal the monster underneath. But Ethan just waited, patient as stone. Finally, Lily May nodded, just once, barely visible. Good, Ethan said. Me too. Come on. He held out his hand, not demanding, just offering. And after a long, trembling moment, Lily May stepped out of the corner and placed her tiny fingers in his palm. They walked to the kitchen together, leaving the broken lamp behind. That afternoon, Margaret found Lily May in the parlor, standing in the exact spot where the table had been. She was staring at the floor like she was trying to understand a mystery. Something on your mind, little one? Margaret asked. Lily May looked up at her, then back at the floor. When she spoke, her voice was so rusty from disuse that it came out as barely more than a whisper. Gone. Margaret's heart jumped. First word in 4 days. Yes, sweetheart, she said gently. Mr. Cole cleaned it up. It's all gone. No. Lily May shook her head slightly. No hit. Gone. Understanding dawned. The child was trying to reconcile what she'd expected, punishment, pain, with what had actually happened. Nothing. The punishment was gone. Margaret knelt down, bringing herself to Lily May's level. That's right, baby. No hitting, not ever. That part of your life? It's gone too. You're safe now. Lily May looked at her with eyes too old for her face. Then, in that broken glass whisper, Promise? I promise, Margaret said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The child studied her for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Margaret's hand, the first time she'd initiated touch, and held on like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. They stood there together as the afternoon light shifted across the floor, and somewhere in the house, Ethan Cole paused in his work and closed his eyes, letting himself believe just for a moment that maybe, he'd done something right. But in town, 12 miles away, Caleb Wright sat in his office at the Territorial Children's Home and penned a carefully worded letter to the territorial judge. A letter about inappropriate acquisition of a child. About a reclusive rancher with no wife, no family, no business raising a little girl alone. A letter designed to undo everything before it could take root. He sealed it with wax, smiled his empty smile, and handed it to the courier. The clock was already ticking. The letter arrived at the Cole Ranch on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous courier who wouldn't meet Ethan's eyes. The envelope was expensive. Cream-colored paper with the territorial seal embossed in red wax. Official, ominous. Ethan opened it standing on the porch while Lily May played in the yard under Margaret's watchful eye. The child had taken to following Margaret everywhere, a silent shadow learning the rhythms of a safe household. She'd started speaking more, single words mostly, sometimes short phrases, and the nightmares that woke her screaming had decreased from every night to every few nights. Progress. Fragile as spun glass. But progress. The words on the page threatened to shatter all of it. Margaret, Ethan called, his voice carefully controlled. Take Lily inside. Margaret heard the tone, recognized the danger in it. She gathered the child without question, ushering her toward the kitchen with promises of fresh cookies. When they were gone, Ethan read the letter again, slower this time, letting the full weight of it sink in. The territorial court had received a formal complaint regarding the acquisition of one female child, approximate age 3 years, from a public auction. Questions had been raised about the appropriateness of a single man, with no wife and no family structure, taking custody of a young girl. An investigation had been opened. A hearing had been scheduled for 2 weeks hence. Until such time, Mr. Ethan Cole was permitted to retain temporary custody, but the child's future would be determined by judicial review. The letter was signed by Judge Harrison Blackwell and countersigned by Caleb Wright, director of the Territorial Children's Home. Ethan's hands crushed the paper slowly, methodically, until it was nothing but a crumpled ball. Then he threw it as hard as he could into the yard and stood there, breathing hard, fighting the rage that threatened to consume him. Not again. He would not lose another child. Not to death, not to law, not to men who saw children as inventory to be managed. Not again. Margaret appeared in the doorway, having settled Lily with coloring papers at the kitchen table. What is it? They want to take her back. The words came out flat, dead. The territorial home. They've filed a complaint. There's a hearing. Margaret's face went pale. On what grounds? I'm unmarried, living alone. Apparently that makes me unfit. He turned to face her, and she saw the same look in his eyes that had been there 5 years ago when he'd buried his wife and child. The look of a man preparing for war. They're going to try to take her, Margaret. They're going to walk into that courtroom and argue that a child is better off in an institution than here, in a home, with people who... His voice broke. With people who care about her. Then we fight, Margaret said simply. We get a lawyer. We show the judge what kind of place that home really is. With what evidence? Ethan's laugh was bitter. Bruises fade. Children are taught not to talk. And I'm just a rancher who bought a child on impulse. That's how they'll paint it. A lonely man making an irrational decision. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter what's true. Matters what they can prove. He looked toward the house, toward where Lily May sat inside, safe and whole for now. I should have known better. Should have known they wouldn't just let her go. Margaret crossed her arms. So what are you going to do? Give up? Let them take her back to that place? No. The word was iron. Never. But I need help. I need someone who knows how to fight this kind of battle. There's a lawyer in Helena, Margaret offered. Samuel Chen handles territorial cases. He's got a reputation for winning impossible fights. Ethan nodded slowly. How fast can you pack a bag? I'm not going to Helena. You are. I'm staying here with Lily. Margaret, she trusts me now, Ethan. You leave. She's going to think you abandoned her. She needs to see you come back. Needs to learn that when you leave, you return. Margaret's voice softened. Go to Helena. Find this lawyer. Fight for her. I'll keep her safe while you're gone. Ethan wanted to argue, but she was right. Lily May's trust was built on consistency, on presence, on the slow accumulation of moments where promises were kept. He told her he wouldn't leave her. Now he had to prove it. I'll be back in 3 days, he said. 4 at most. We'll be here, Margaret promised. Inside, Lily May looked up from her coloring as Ethan entered. She'd drawn something that might have been a horse, or possibly a dog, in shades of brown and black crayon. She held it up for his approval, and the hope in her eyes nearly undid him. That's real good, he said, kneeling beside her chair. Is that Thunder? Thunder was the gray mare he'd let Lily feed carrots to yesterday, her first time touching a horse without flinching. Lily nodded eagerly. Big, she said, spreading her arms wide. Strong. Like you, Ethan said, and watched her face light up with something he'd never seen there before. Pride. Listen, I need to go into town for a few days. Margaret's going to stay here with you. I'll be back soon, I promise. The light died. Lily May's face went carefully blank the way it did when she was preparing for disappointment. You go, and I come back, Ethan said firmly. Always. When I say I'll be back, I mean it. You understand? She studied him with those 2 old eyes. Men go, not come back. The words hit like a fist to the chest. How many times had this child been abandoned? How many promises had been broken before she'd learned not to believe them? I'm not those men, Ethan said. Watch. He stood, walked to the door, opened it, stepped outside. Then he immediately stepped back in, closed the door, and returned to her. See? I left. I came back. That's what I do. Lily May's brow furrowed, processing this demonstration. I'm going to do it again, just for longer this time, Ethan continued. But the coming back part? That doesn't change. I always come back. Always. He pulled something from his pocket, his father's old pocket watch, silver and worn. You hold on to this while I'm gone. It's important to me. That way you know I have to come back to get it. He placed the watch in her small hands. She stared at it like he'd given her the sun and moon. Keep it safe for me? Ethan asked. Lily May clutched the watch to her chest and nodded solemnly. Good girl. He stood, looked at Margaret. 3 days. We'll be fine, Margaret assured him. But as Ethan rode out an hour later, supplies packed, money secured, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was racing against a clock that had already run out. The 3 days Ethan was gone were the longest of Lily May's short life. She carried the pocket watch everywhere, checking it obsessively even though she couldn't tell time. She slept with it under her pillow. She held it during meals. Margaret watched the child's anxiety build with each passing hour and did her best to provide distraction. They baked bread together, Lily's small hands learning to knead dough. They fed the chickens, collected eggs, brushed the horses. Margaret told stories, nothing scary, nothing with abandonment, just simple tales of animals and adventures with happy endings. But every time a sound came from outside, Lily May would run to the window, watch clutched tight, hoping to see a rider coming up the valley. On the evening of the 3rd day, she stopped eating, just sat at the table, staring at the uneaten food, the watch pressed against her heart. "He's coming back, sweetheart," Margaret said gently. He promised. Lily May shook her head slowly. "Men go, not come back. Not this man. This man keeps his word." But doubt had taken root. Lily May retreated into the silence she'd lived in before, her words drying up like a creek in August. That night, the screaming nightmares returned. Margaret held her through it, rocked her, whispered reassurances that felt hollow even to her own ears. Dawn broke on the 4th day, gray and cold. Autumn was coming to Montana, the mornings crisp with the promise of winter. Margaret made breakfast mechanically, her own worry gnawing at her composure. 4 days. He'd said 3, maybe 4. But 4 was almost over and still no sign. Lily May sat at the window, motionless, the watch in her lap. "Come eat, baby," Margaret coaxed. The child didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge she'd heard. Margaret was about to try again when she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, not the usual rhythm of the ranch horses moving in the pasture. This was purposeful. Coming closer. Lily May heard it too. She pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging it, her whole body tense. The rider crested the hill, and even from a distance there was no mistaking Ethan Cole's silhouette. Tall, straight, coming home. Lily May made a sound Margaret had never heard from her, a cry of pure, anguished relief. She scrambled from the chair, ran to the door, fumbled with the handle her small hands could barely manage. Margaret helped her, and the moment the door opened, Lily May was running across the yard in her nightgown and bare feet, the pocket watch clutched in both hands. Ethan saw her coming and dismounted fast, dropping to one knee just in time to catch her as she threw herself into his arms with the full force of her tiny body. She was sobbing, loud, messy, the kind of crying she'd never allowed herself before, and saying his name over and over like a prayer. "I'm here," Ethan said roughly, holding her tight. "I'm here. I promised, didn't I? I came back." Lily May pulled back just enough to shove the pocket watch at him, her face streaked with tears. "Yours, take. You back." "That's right, I'm back." He took the watch, but then immediately tucked it back into her hands, closing her fingers around it. "But you keep holding it. Keep it safe a little longer, because I'm not going anywhere." She buried her face in his shoulder and cried like the world was ending, and Ethan held her through it, his own eyes burning with the realization of how close he'd come to breaking her trust. 4 days instead of 3. 4 days of a child learning to believe again, then teetering on the edge of losing that belief. Margaret watched from the porch, wiping her own eyes with her apron, and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. When Lily May's sobs finally subsided into hiccups, Ethan carried her inside and settled at the kitchen table with her still in his arms. She refused to let go, her fists knotted in his shirt. "Did you find him?" Margaret asked quietly. "The lawyer." "I found him." Ethan's expression was grim. "Samuel Chen, smart as they come and mean as a snake when he needs to be. He's coming here tomorrow to prepare. We've got 10 days until the hearing." "What did he say about our chances?" "He said the truth doesn't matter as much as the performance, that we need to be ready for them to paint me as everything from a predator to a fool." His arms tightened around Lily May. He also said we need to document everything, her condition when I got her progress now, medical testimony if we can get it. "Doc Morrison would help," Margaret said. He's a good man. Chen's already sending word. He'll be here tomorrow too. Ethan looked down at the child in his arms, who had finally stopped crying but still held his shirt like he might disappear. They're going to try to take you away from me, little one. Try to say you'd be better off somewhere else. But I'm not going to let that happen. You hear me? We're going to fight. Lily May lifted her head, her face blotchy and wet. Fight? That's right. Fight to keep you here. Fight to keep you safe. He smoothed her tangled hair back from her forehead. Because you belong here now. This is your home. And I protect what's mine. Something shifted in Lily May's expression. A flicker of the fierceness she'd need to survive what was coming. Mine, she repeated softly. Then, with more force, mine. Yes, Ethan said. Yours. This house, this ranch, Margaret, me, all yours. Nobody's taking that away. She nodded slowly, then settled back against his chest, exhausted from emotion. Within minutes, she was asleep, her fingers still twisted in his shirt. Margaret began preparing food, her movements efficient but tense. What aren't you telling me? Ethan waited until he was sure Lily May was deeply asleep before answering. Chen did some digging. The territorial home is bringing Dorothy Lang to testify. Margaret's hand stilled on the bread dough. Dorothy Lang was Redemption Flat's wealthiest widow, a woman who'd inherited her late husband's mining fortune and spent her time managing what she called charitable endeavors. She was also known for her piety, her rigid views on proper society, and her ability to sway public opinion. What does Dorothy Lang have to do with this? Apparently, she's been wanting to establish a proper orphanage, not the territorial home, something better, she claims, more civilized. And she had her eye on Lily May as one of the first children for her new facility. Ethan's voice went hard. Claims a child of such tender years needs a woman's influence. That a motherless household is no place for a little girl. That I'm, and I quote, ill-equipped to provide the moral and domestic education necessary for proper feminine development. Margaret snorted. That woman wouldn't know proper feminine development if it bit her on her overstuffed bustle. She's had 3 housekeepers quit in as many months because she treats them like slaves. Doesn't matter what we know, matters what she'll say under oath. Ethan shifted Lily May slightly in his arms. Chen says she's a formidable witness, respected, convincing, the kind of woman judges listen to. Then we find someone they'll listen to more. Like who? I'm a rancher who hasn't been to church in 5 years. You're my housekeeper. Who's going to testify for us that has any weight? Margaret thought for a moment, her jaw set. Sarah Henderson. Ethan looked up sharply. Bill Henderson's wife? The same. She was at that auction, saw the whole thing, saw how Lily May looked before you took her. And Sarah Henderson is... She paused, choosing her words carefully. She's everything Dorothy Lang pretends to be. Genuinely good, active in the church, respected, 4 healthy children of her own. If she testifies that you did the right thing, people will listen. Why would she testify for me? I barely know the woman. Because she's been asking about Lily May every time I go to town, Margaret said, asking how she's doing, if she's eating, if she's happy. Sarah saw something in that child that day, something that haunted her. She'll help. I know she will. Ethan nodded slowly. Chen's coming tomorrow at noon. Can you ride to the Henderson place this afternoon? Ask her to be here when he arrives? Consider it done. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and reached for her riding coat. You keep that baby close and let her sleep. Lord knows she needs it. After Margaret left, Ethan carried Lily May to the rocking chair by the window and settled in, cradling her against his chest. Outside, the Montana sky was doing what it did best, painting itself in impossible colors as the sun climbed higher, golds and blues and shades without names. He thought about the hearing, about standing in front of a judge and having to justify loving a child who needed love, about men and women who would argue that institutions were better than homes, that propriety mattered more than safety, that a child was better off in a cage than free with someone who gave a damn. His wife's face drifted through his memory, Catherine, with her quick laugh and her fierce heart. She would have loved Lily May, would have fought like hell for her. The baby they'd lost would have been about Lily's age now if she'd lived. Sometimes Ethan let himself imagine it, 2 little girls playing in the yard, Catherine watching from the porch, a life that might have been. But Catherine was gone. The baby was gone. And all he had left was the child sleeping in his arms and the chance to do something right in a world that had gone so terribly wrong. He wouldn't waste it. "I've got you," he whispered to Lily May, though she couldn't hear him. "Whatever it takes. Whoever I have to fight. I've got you." The child slept on, the pocket watch still clutched in her small fist, and the sun continued its arc across the sky, marking time on a clock that was counting down to judgment. Samuel Chen arrived the next day precisely at noon, riding a bay gelding and carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had seen better decades. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the kind of controlled intensity that suggested a brilliant mind constantly 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He was also Chinese, which meant he'd faced his own battles with territorial prejudice and come out winning. Ethan liked him immediately. Margaret was back from the Henderson place with good news. Sarah would testify, and she'd bring her husband Bill as well. They'd both been disturbed by the auction and troubled by rumors they'd heard about the territorial home. They wanted to help. Doc Morrison arrived shortly after Chen, a grizzled man in his 60s who'd been practicing medicine on the frontier for 30 years. He'd seen everything there was to see, and very little surprised him anymore. But what he found when he examined Lily May in the privacy of the guest room made him set his jaw hard enough to crack teeth. Ethan waited downstairs with Chen and Margaret, pacing like a caged animal, while the doctor conducted his examination. Sarah Henderson had arrived as well, sitting quietly in the parlor, her kind face troubled. When Doc Morrison finally came down, he looked like he'd aged a decade. His medical bag seemed heavier than when he'd carried it up. "Well?" Ethan demanded. "Ethan, sketches, measurements, notes. If we need to present medical evidence, I've got it." "We need it," Chen said quietly. He'd been watching the exchange with the careful attention of a man building a case. Every piece of evidence that shows the condition she came from helps establish that Mr. Cole's intervention was necessary and beneficial. "Can you testify to her current condition as well? The improvements?" "Her physical health has improved dramatically," Morrison said. "She's gained weight, not enough yet, but progress. The new bruises have stopped appearing, she's clean, well-fed, and showing signs of normal childhood development that were completely absent before. Whoever's caring for her now is doing it right." He looked at Ethan and Margaret. "But the psychological damage? That's going to take years, maybe a lifetime. This child has been through hell. She needs stability, consistency, safety. The absolute worst thing you could do to her now would be to uproot her again." "That's exactly what they want to do," Ethan said bitterly. "Uproot her. Send her to Dorothy Lang's new orphanage where she'll get proper feminine education." Morrison's expression darkened. "Dorothy Lang couldn't educate a fence post. That woman's idea of charity is making people grateful for her scraps while she lives in a mansion." He turned to Chen. "You put me on that stand and I'll make it clear that moving this child now would be psychological torture." "I'll need that in writing," Chen said. "A formal medical opinion. Can you have it ready in a week?" "I'll have it ready in 2 days." Chen nodded, making notes in his own journal. "Good. Now, Mrs. Henderson, I understand you witnessed the auction?" Sarah straightened in her chair. "I did, and I'll never forget it as long as I live." "Tell me what you saw." Sarah's voice was steady as she recounted the scene, the crowd's disinterest, the child's terror, Ethan's intervention. "She looked like she had given up," Sarah said softly. "Like she'd already died inside and was just waiting for her body to catch up. I've never seen anything like it. And when Mr. Cole took her, when he knelt down on that platform and spoke to her like she mattered, that was the first time I saw anything resembling hope in her face." "And you're willing to testify to this?" "Under oath?" Chen asked. "I am. So is my husband. We've talked about it, and we both feel that child belongs with Mr. Cole. What he's done for her, it's nothing short of miraculous." Chen made more notes. "The opposing side will argue that a single man cannot provide appropriate care for a young girl. They'll claim she needs a woman's influence. How would you respond to that?" "I'd say she's got Margaret Hale, who's more woman than Dorothy Lang could ever hope to be," Sarah said firmly. "And I'd say that what a child needs most isn't a proper lady teaching her embroidery. It's someone who won't hurt her, someone who'll keep her safe, someone who'll love her." Gender doesn't matter nearly as much as goodness. Margaret wiped her eyes. Thank you, Sarah. Chen looked around the room, his sharp mind assembling the pieces. Here's where we stand. We have medical evidence of abuse. We have eyewitness testimony of the auction. We have documentation of the child's improvement. What we need now is to prepare for their attacks. He turned to Ethan. They're going to come at you hard. They'll question your motives. They'll suggest impropriety. They'll paint you as impulsive, unstable, possibly dangerous. How do you respond to that? With the truth, Ethan said. I saw a child who needed help. I helped her, that's all. The truth is a starting point, not a defense, Chen said. We need more. We need character witnesses. People who can speak to your integrity, your stability, your fitness as a guardian. I've been a hermit for 5 years, Ethan said bluntly. I don't have friends. I have employees and neighbors who barely know me. Then we work with what we have. Chen consulted his notes. Margaret, how long have you worked for Mr. Cole? 30 years, counting when I worked for his father. And in that time, have you ever witnessed him harm anyone? Lose his temper inappropriately? Show any signs of instability or violence? Margaret snorted. Ethan Cole is the most controlled man I've ever known. Sometimes too controlled. After his wife died, he near about died himself from grief, but he never lashed out, never hurt anyone, just went quiet and worked himself half to death. Until that child came along and reminded him how to live again. That's good, Chen said. We use that. The grief, the loss, the redemption. We paint a picture of a man who understands pain and chose to spare someone else from it. He looked at Ethan seriously. This is going to be ugly. They're going to dig into your past, Catherine's death, the baby. They'll try to suggest you're replacing them, that this is about your grief, not the child's welfare. Let them try, Ethan said coldly. Nothing they say can be worse than what I've already lived through. Don't underestimate Dorothy Lang, Chen warned. She's skilled at making cruelty sound like compassion. She'll stand up there and talk about the child's need for proper moral education, for feminine guidance, for the kind of refinement only a woman can provide, and she'll make it sound reasonable. Then we make the truth louder than her lies, Margaret said. Chen smiled slightly. That's exactly what we're going to do. But we need to be strategic. Doc, I need your medical report to focus not just on past abuse, but on current well-being. Make it impossible for them to argue that the child is suffering in Mr. Cole's care. Done, Morrison said. Mrs. Henderson, your testimony needs to emphasize the child's condition at the auction compared to now. The transformation. Make it visceral. Make the judge feel the difference. Sarah nodded. I can do that. And Margaret, you're going to testify about the daily reality of this household, the routines, the care, the moments that prove this is a real home, not just a roof over the child's head. With pleasure, Margaret said. Chen turned to Ethan last. And you need to be ready to explain yourself. Why you bought her, why you're fighting for her, why you're the right person to raise her. Can you do that? Ethan thought about Lily May sleeping upstairs, the pocket watch still under her pillow, about her nightmares that were slowly fading, about the way she'd started to smile, tentative, uncertain, but real, about how she'd cried when he came back, not because she was sad, but because she'd learned to trust him. Yes, he said, I can do that. Good. Chen closed his journal with finality. Then we have 10 days to build a case strong enough to withstand Dorothy Lang, Caleb Wright, and whatever else they throw at us. 10 days to prove that this child belongs exactly where she is. As the others dispersed to their tasks, Morrison to write his report, Sarah to go home and discuss testimony with her husband, Margaret to start dinner, Chen pulled Ethan aside. I need to ask you something, the lawyer said quietly, and I need an honest answer. Go ahead. Why are you really doing this? Not the noble reason, not the one you'll tell the judge, the real reason. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said simply, because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what it's like to believe you'll never get anything back. When I saw her on that platform, I saw someone who'd already accepted that no one was coming, that she wasn't worth saving, and His voice roughened. I couldn't let her believe that. I couldn't let another person in this world think they don't matter. Chen studied him, then nodded slowly. That's what you tell the judge. Exactly that, because that's the truth. And sometimes the truth is enough. And if it's not, then we fight anyway, Chen said, because that's what we do for the people who matter. Upstairs, Lily May woke from her nap, reached under her pillow for the pocket watch, and held it close to her chest. She could hear voices downstairs, deep, serious, the kind that meant important things were happening. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. Someone was trying to take her away from here, from Margaret, from Ethan, from the first place that had ever felt safe. She climbed out of bed, padded to the door, and sat down to listen. Learning, preparing, remembering what she'd learned in the bad places, that survival meant paying attention, meant staying quiet, meant being ready. But this time, for the first time in her short life, she wasn't alone. This time, someone was fighting for her instead of against her, and that made all the difference. The 10 days before the hearing moved like a river during spring thaw, sometimes rushing forward in a torrent of preparation, sometimes slowing to moments so quiet they felt suspended in amber. The ranch became a different place, charged with purpose and weighted with the knowledge that everything balanced on the edge of a single day in court. Chen returned twice more, each time drilling Ethan and Margaret on testimony, refining arguments, anticipating attacks. He was relentless in his preparation, and Ethan understood why the man won cases others wouldn't touch. He didn't just know the law. He knew people, knew how to take a story and make it impossible to dismiss. Doc Morrison delivered his medical report on the third day, and even Chen, who'd seen his share of human cruelty documented on paper, had to set it down and take a moment before continuing. The details were clinical, precise, and absolutely damning. No one could read that report and believe the territorial home was anything other than a house of horrors. Sarah Henderson came by twice to review her testimony with Chen, bringing fresh bread and encouragement each time. Her husband Bill came once, a quiet man who said little, but whose testimony would be simple and devastating. He'd seen the child before, seen her after, and the difference spoke for itself. But it was Lily May herself who changed the most during those 10 days. She'd figured out, with the peculiar intuition of traumatized children, that something important was happening, something that involved her. She didn't understand courts or custody or legal battles, but she understood that people were preparing to fight. And she understood, with a clarity that broke Ethan's heart, that she might be taken away. The nightmares came back with a vengeance. She woke screaming almost every night, and more than once Ethan found himself sitting on the floor beside her bed at 3 a.m, his hand resting on her small back while she sobbed into her pillow. The pocket watch never left her possession. She carried it during the day, slept with it at night, and checked it obsessively as if counting down to some inevitable disaster. On the 7th day, Margaret found her in the kitchen at dawn, standing on a chair to reach the high shelf where the bread was kept. She'd dragged a sack of flour across the floor and was methodically filling her pockets with biscuits, hardtack, anything she could carry. "Baby, what are you doing?" Margaret asked gently. Lily May froze, then slowly turned. Her face was set in that careful blankness that meant she was terrified. "Food," she said simply. "For when?" "For when what, sweetheart?" "When they take me." The words were matter of fact, resigned. "Need food. They don't feed, not much." Margaret's throat closed. The child was preparing, hoarding supplies for the return to hell because she didn't believe the adults could protect her. Because every other adult in her life had failed her, so why would these be different? "Come here," Margaret said, opening her arms. Lily May climbed down from the chair, slowly, warily, and stood just out of reach. "We're not going to let them take you," Margaret said, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "Mr. Ethan, me, the lawyer, the doctor, Mrs. Henderson, we're all fighting to keep you here. This is your home. Nobody's taking you away. You don't know." Lily May's voice was small but certain. "Adults say things, don't mean them. They come. They take. Always." "Not always, not this time." "How you know?" It was a fair question, an impossible question, because Margaret didn't know, couldn't promise. The hearing could go either way, and if the judge ruled against them, there would be nothing any of them could do except watch Lily May be carried away. So instead of making promises she couldn't keep, Margaret told the truth. "I don't know for certain," she admitted, "but I know Mr. Ethan, and I know that man will fight for you with everything he has. I know he won't stop fighting until he can't fight anymore. That's not a guarantee, baby, but it's as close as I can give you." Lily May studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a biscuit, and held it out to Margaret. "You keep, for if." Margaret took the biscuit, her vision blurring. "Okay, I'll keep it safe, just in case." The child nodded, apparently satisfied with this compromise, and went to find Ethan. She'd taken to shadowing him everywhere during these days, as if proximity could prevent separation. She followed him to the barn, sat silent while he worked with the horses, handed him tools he didn't need just to be useful. Ethan never sent her away, never told her to give him space. He understood what she was doing, memorizing him, storing up moments against potential loss. So he talked to her while he worked, explained what he was doing, let her small presence become woven into the fabric of his days. On the 9th day, Chen arrived with news. Dorothy Lang has filed additional testimony. She's bringing 3 women from her charitable committee to speak about the importance of proper feminine education. All respected members of the community, all prepared to argue that a motherless household cannot adequately raise a girl child. "What about Caleb Wright?" Ethan asked. They were standing in the barn while Lily May brushed Thunder's mane with intense concentration. "Is he testifying?" "He'll be there, but he's letting Lang do the heavy lifting. Smarter that way. She comes across as concerned and maternal. He stays in the background as the professional administrator who reluctantly agrees with her assessment." Chen's expression was grim. "They're building a narrative. A lonely, grief-stricken man makes an impulsive decision, takes a child to fill a void left by his dead family, cannot possibly provide the moral and domestic education a young girl requires. The child would be better served in a proper institutional setting with female guidance." "That's not what happened," Margaret said sharply. "Doesn't matter. It's what they'll argue, and it'll sound convincing." Chen looked at Ethan. "You need to be prepared for them to bring up Catherine. They'll suggest you're trying to replace her, replace the daughter you lost." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them try. They will try. And they'll make it sound pathological, make you sound unstable. You have to stay calm when they do it. Can't get angry. Can't break. You show emotion, you prove their point." "I know how to control myself," Ethan said quietly. Chen studied him. "Yes, I expect you do. But there's controlling yourself and there's testifying under hostile questioning. They're going to push every button they can find. Make sure you're ready." That evening, after Lily May had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Ethan stood in his bedroom and pulled an old trunk from the closet. He hadn't opened it in 5 years. Hadn't been able to bear looking at what it contained. Now he lifted the lid slowly and confronted the ghosts. Catherine's wedding dress, carefully preserved. The tiny christening gown they'd bought before the baby was born. Letters tied with ribbon. A lock of dark hair. Photographs. Catherine laughing, Catherine pregnant, Catherine holding their newborn daughter in the single hour before fever took them both. Ethan sat on the floor surrounded by memories and let himself remember. Not the grief. He'd lived in that long enough. But the love, the joy, the brief, shining happiness before it all went dark. Then he packed everything carefully back into the trunk, closed it, and returned it to the closet. They were wrong. Dorothy Lang and her committee, and anyone else who thought Lily May was a replacement. You didn't replace people you loved. You carried them with you and made room for new people beside them. Catherine would have wanted him to save that child, would have fought for her herself if she'd lived. This wasn't about replacing loss. It was about preventing it. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. The Montana sky, that particular shade of blue that hurt to look at directly. Ethan dressed in his best clothes, a suit he hadn't worn since Catherine's funeral, and looked at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back. Somewhere in the past weeks, he'd stopped being a ghost and started being human again. Lily May appeared in the doorway, already dressed in the new clothes Margaret had made for her. A simple blue dress, clean and pressed, with her hair brushed until it shone. She looked like any normal child except for her eyes. Those eyes had seen too much and understood too much and carried knowledge no 3-year-old should possess. "Ready?" Ethan asked. She shook her head slowly. "Me neither," he admitted, "but we're going anyway." She crossed the room and took his hand, and together they went downstairs to where Margaret waited with the wagon. The courthouse in Redemption Flats was a 2-story brick building that served multiple purposes: court sessions, town meetings, occasional theatrical performances. Today it was packed. Word had spread about the hearing, and apparently the entire town wanted to watch the drama unfold. Chen met them at the door, his face grave. "Caleb Wright's already here. So is Dorothy Lang and her committee. They brought half the church congregation as character witnesses." "Let him," Ethan said. "We've got the truth." "The truth is just one story among many," Chen reminded him. "Don't forget that." They entered the courtroom together, and immediately every head turned. Ethan felt the weight of judgment in those stares, the curiosity and speculation. Lily May pressed against his leg, her small hand gripping his with desperate strength. Judge Harrison Blackwell was already seated at the bench, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested he'd heard every lie ever told and believed none of them. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for rigidity. He followed the letter of the law, not the spirit. Chen had warned Ethan this could go either way. Dorothy Lang sat at the opposing table, resplendent in purple silk with a hat that probably cost more than Ethan's horse. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd been taught from birth that she was superior. Beside her sat her lawyer, a slick man named Vernon Hayes, who specialized in making cruel things sound charitable. Caleb Wright sat behind them, his small eyes watching everything with calculating patience. The judge gavelled the room to order. "We're here to determine the custody of one minor child, female, approximately 3 years of age, currently in the temporary custody of Mr. Ethan Cole. The territorial home has challenged this arrangement on grounds that Mr. Cole is unfit to provide adequate care. Mr. Hayes, you may present your opening statement." Hayes stood, buttoned his coat, and smiled at the judge with practiced warmth. "Your Honor, this is a simple case about what's best for a vulnerable child. Mrs. Dorothy Lang is a pillar of this community, a woman of impeccable character who has devoted her life to charitable works. She has the means, the knowledge, and the compassion to provide this child with everything she needs: education, moral guidance, feminine instruction. Mr. Cole, while perhaps well-intentioned, is a widower who lives alone on a remote ranch. He has no wife, no female relatives, no experience with children. His household consists of himself and a housekeeper. To put it bluntly, this is no environment for a young girl. The territorial home, working with Mrs. Lang's new charitable institution, can provide structure, education, and the female influence this child desperately needs. We ask the court to remove the child from Mr. Cole's custody and place her in Mrs. Lang's care where she belongs." He sat down, looking satisfied. Chen stood next. He didn't smile, didn't perform, just spoke with quiet intensity. "Your Honor, opposing counsel wants you to believe this is about what's best for the child. But if we examine the facts, not the theories, not the ideals, but the actual facts, a different picture emerges. This child came to Mr. Cole's attention at a public auction where she was being sold like livestock. She was malnourished, terrified, and showed signs of extensive physical abuse. Mr. Cole purchased her legally and took her to his home, where she received immediate medical attention, proper nutrition, and safety. In the weeks since, her condition has improved dramatically. We have medical documentation. We have eyewitness testimony. We have evidence of a child who is dying in the system that now claims to want her back. Mrs. Lang talks about feminine influence and moral education, but what good are those things to a child who's being starved and beaten? Mr. Cole gave this child something the territorial home never did and never would. He gave her safety. He gave her a home. And we're here to prove that taking her away from that would be the cruelest thing this court could do." The courtroom was silent as Chen sat down. Ethan felt Lily May's hand tighten in his. Judge Blackwell looked between the two lawyers. "Very well, Mr. Hayes, call your first witness." The petitioner calls Mrs. Dorothy Lang. Dorothy Lang took the stand with the bearing of a queen ascending a throne. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and settled into the chair with perfect posture. Hayes approached her gently, like she was precious china. Mrs. Lang, please tell the court about your charitable work. For 15 years, I've dedicated myself to helping the less fortunate, Dorothy said, her voice cultured and warm. Orphans particularly have always touched my heart. When I learned about the deplorable conditions in some territorial institutions, I knew I had to do something. That's why I'm establishing a proper home for orphaned children, a place with educated staff, moral instruction, and real opportunities for these poor souls. And you have specific plans for female children? Of course. Girls require different education than boys. They need instruction in domestic arts, moral refinement, proper comportment. These skills will enable them to find good positions as governesses, teachers, or housewives. Without such training, they're doomed to poverty or worse. And in your opinion, can a single man provide such training? Dorothy's expression became sorrowful. I'm sure Mr. Cole means well, but a man, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot teach a girl what she needs to know. He cannot show her how to be a woman, how to navigate female society, how to develop the moral character that only female guidance can instill. Thank you, Mrs. Lang. Hayes returned to his seat. Chen stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Lang, you mentioned deplorable conditions in territorial institutions. Have you personally visited the territorial home where this child was kept? Dorothy hesitated. Well, no, but I've heard... So you have no first-hand knowledge of the conditions there? I have reports from reliable sources. What sources? Mr. Wright has assured me that while the facilities are adequate, they lack the refinement a proper institution should have. Chen nodded slowly. Mr. Wright, who runs the institution, told you his own institution needs improvement. Interesting. Now, you mentioned moral instruction. What specifically would you teach this child about morality? Obedience, humility, gratitude, proper behavior. Gratitude to whom? Dorothy blinked. To those who care for her, naturally. So you teach her to be grateful for charity, to see herself as someone who must earn kindness through good behavior and obedience. That's not what Isn't it? Chen's voice was sharp now. You want to teach her she's less than, that she should be thankful for scraps, that her value comes from how well she serves others. Is that the moral instruction you're offering? I want to teach her to be a productive member of society. A productive member or a convenient servant? Chen let the question hang. Mrs. Lang, how many orphans are you currently housing in your new institution? We're still in the planning stages, so 0. You're asking this court to remove a child from a home where she's currently safe and thriving and place her in an institution that doesn't actually exist yet. It will exist very soon. Will it? And while you're building it, where exactly would this child go? Back to the territorial home, the place you just described as lacking refinement? Dorothy's composure cracked slightly. Temporary arrangements could be made. Temporary. Like the temporary arrangement that left her covered in bruises and starving? Chen's voice cut like a blade. No further questions. Dorothy left the stand flustered, her perfect facade cracked. Vernon Hayes called his next witness, a woman from the church committee who testified about the importance of female society and proper education. Then another, saying essentially the same thing. Chen's cross-examinations were brief and devastating, pointing out that none of them had met Lily May, examined her, or knew anything about her actual needs. Then Hayes called Caleb Wright. The director of the territorial home took the stand looking appropriately concerned and professional. He was good at this, Ethan realized. Good at looking like he cared. Mr. Wright, Hayes said, tell us about the child in question. What was her condition when she came to your facility? She arrived approximately 8 months ago, Wright said smoothly. Parentless, undernourished, extremely withdrawn. We provided basic care, food, shelter, medical attention when needed. But our facility is overcrowded and underfunded. We lack the resources to give each child individual attention. And when Mr. Cole purchased her at auction, were you concerned? Very. I have nothing against Mr. Cole personally, but removing a child from institutional care and placing her with a stranger raises serious questions. We have no way of knowing what happens behind closed doors on that ranch. Chen stood. Mr. Wright, you said the child was undernourished when she arrived at your facility. How much weight did she gain during the 8 months she was in your care? Wright shifted. I don't have exact figures. Approximately? Perhaps a pound or two? A pound or two in 8 months? And in the 6 weeks she's been with Mr. Cole, she's gained 7 pounds. Medical records confirm that. Does that suggest inadequate care? Weight isn't the only measure of, you're right. Let's talk about the bruises, the cigarette burns, the broken bones, all documented by Dr. Morrison as having occurred while she was in your facility. How did those happen? I run a large institution with limited staff. I can't personally supervise every moment of every child's day. So you're admitting children in your care are being abused, and you're doing nothing about it? I'm saying that in any large facility, unfortunate incidents can occur. Unfortunate incidents. Chen's voice dripped contempt. Is that what you call burning a 3-year-old with cigarettes? An unfortunate incident? Hayes jumped up. Objection! The counselor is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Blackwell said. Move on, Mr. Chen. Mr. Wright, you filed this complaint within days of Mr. Cole taking custody. Why the urgent concern? I was worried about the child's welfare. Really? Because you didn't seem worried about her welfare when she was covered in bruises in your basement. But the moment she's removed to a safe home, suddenly you're very concerned. Why is that? Wright's face flushed. I resent the implication. Answer the question. I followed proper procedures in filing the complaint. Proper procedures? Did those procedures include contacting Dorothy Lang before filing, coordinating testimony, planning where the child would go if removed from Mr. Cole's care? I consulted with community leaders about the best interests of you coordinated with Mrs. Lang to get the child back under your control, Chen said flatly. Because children in your facility generate revenue from the territory, don't they? And you were about to lose that revenue stream. That's outrageous, Wright sputtered. Is it? How much does the territory pay per child per month for housing in your facility? Wright's mouth opened and closed. I don't see how that's relevant. I'll tell you how it's relevant, Chen said. Psychologically, she's still fragile, but she's showing signs of attachment to her caregivers and developing age-appropriate social behaviors. In my professional opinion, removing her from her current placement would be catastrophic. Why? Because trauma isn't just physical. This child has learned that the world is unsafe, that adults hurt her, that she has no value. Mr. Cole's household is the first place she's experienced safety. Removing her now would confirm her worst beliefs about herself and the world. It could cause psychological damage that would take years to overcome, if it ever could be. Hayes cross-examined, but Morrison was unshakable. Medical facts were medical facts. Chen called Sarah Henderson next. She testified about the auction, about Lily May's condition, about the transformation she'd witnessed. I've raised 4 children, she said, and I'm telling you, what that man has done for that baby is nothing short of miraculous. She was dying. Now she's living. That's all that matters. Hayes tried to shake her. But Mrs. Henderson, don't you think a child needs a mother? I think a child needs someone who won't hurt her, Sarah shot back. Gender doesn't matter nearly as much as goodness. And Mr. Cole is a good man, Margaret testified next, describing the daily reality of caring for Lily May. The nightmares, the food hoarding, the slow, painful process of teaching a child that safety was possible. That baby thinks she's going back to hell, Margaret said bluntly. And if you send her there, you prove her right. Finally, Chen called Ethan. The walk to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Every eye in the courtroom followed him. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down. Chen started gently. Mr. Cole, why did you purchase Lily May at the auction? Ethan looked at the lawyer, then at the judge, then at Lily May sitting in the front row with Margaret. The child was watching him with absolute focus, the pocket watch clutched in her hands. Because nobody else would, he said simply. And I couldn't let her go back. Why not? Because I knew what going back meant. I saw it in her face. She'd given up. And He paused, searching for words. I've lost people. I know what it's like to think you'll never get anything good again. I couldn't let a child live with that. You're talking about your wife and daughter. Yes. Some might say you're trying to replace them. What would you say to that? I'd say they don't understand grief. Ethan said quietly. You don't replace people you love, but grief shouldn't stop you from loving new people. Catherine would have wanted me to help that child. She'd have done it herself if she could. Hayes stood for cross-examination, and his expression was predatory. Mr. Cole, you live alone on a remote ranch. You have no wife, no female relatives nearby. How exactly do you plan to raise a young girl? With Margaret's help, with patience, with care. But can you teach her to be a woman? I can teach her to be human, to be safe, to know she matters. The rest will follow. Will it? Can you help her with intimate female concerns as she grows? Margaret can. And if we need other help, we'll find it. But basic human decency doesn't require a particular gender. Hayes changed tactics. You bought her on impulse, didn't you? Saw her, felt sorry for her, made a rash decision. No. I saw her and knew she needed help. That's not impulse. That's responding to need. You paid far more than the asking price. Why? Because she's not merchandise. She's a child. And you don't haggle over saving someone's life. Hayes smiled coldly. Very noble. But nobility isn't the same as capability. You have no experience with children, no training. What makes you think you can handle a traumatized child? I don't know if I can, Ethan said honestly. But I know I'll try, and I know what happens if I don't. She goes back to the place that hurt her. I won't let that happen. It's not your choice, Mr. Cole. It's the court's. Then I'm asking the court to make the right choice. Hayes pressed harder, trying to rattle him, but Ethan stayed calm, answered every question honestly, didn't get angry, didn't break. Finally, Hayes said, "No further questions," and sat down looking frustrated. Chen stood for redirect. Mr. Cole, do you love this child? Ethan looked at Lily May. She was watching him with those enormous eyes, the watch pressed to her heart. Yes, he said. I do. Why? Because she's brave. Because she survived things that would destroy most people. Because she trusted me when she had every reason not to. Because she matters. His voice roughened. Because she's mine to protect now, and I don't abandon what's mine. Thank you, Chen said. No further questions. Judge Blackwell looked at his notes. Both sides have presented their cases. I'll take this under advisement and issue a ruling tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. It was over. All the preparation, all the testimony, all the fighting, over. And now they had to wait. Ethan left the stand and walked to where Lily May sat. She launched herself into his arms, and he held her while the courtroom emptied around them. Did we win? She whispered against his shoulder. I don't know yet, baby, but we tried. We tried as hard as we could. She pulled back to look at him. If they take me, they're not going to. But if they do, her small face was fierce. I'll remember. I'll remember you came back. I'll remember you tried. Ethan's chest hurt. I'm not letting them take you. You don't know, Lily May said, echoing what she'd told Margaret days ago. Adults don't know. Things happen anyway. She was right. He didn't know. Couldn't promise. All he could do was wait for a judge to decide whether love mattered more than propriety, whether safety mattered more than social conventions, whether one broken man and one broken child could build something whole together. They rode back to the ranch in silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood, and the pocket watch ticked in Lily May's hands, counting down to judgment. That night, nobody slept. Margaret moved through the house like a spirit, tidying things that didn't need tidying, making tea that nobody drank, standing at windows and staring out at darkness. Ethan sat in the parlor with a book he didn't read, turning pages at random intervals, his mind replaying every moment of the hearing, every answer he'd given, every question he should have answered differently. Lily May lay in her bed upstairs, eyes wide open, the pocket watch ticking beside her pillow like a heartbeat counting down to disaster. She'd learned long ago that sleep made you vulnerable, and tonight vulnerability felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. So she stayed awake, listening to the house settle around her, memorizing the sounds of safety in case she never heard them again. Around 2 in the morning, Ethan heard small footsteps on the stairs. He looked up to find Lily May standing in the doorway in her nightgown, the watch clutched in both hands. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Me neither." He set the book aside and patted the chair beside him. "Come here." She crossed the room and climbed into the chair, curling against his side like a cat seeking warmth. He put his arm around her and they sat together in the lamplight, not speaking, just existing in the same space while the clock on the mantel ticked toward morning. "Tell me about her," Lily May said suddenly. "Your wife." Ethan stiffened slightly. "Why?" "The mean lady said you want me because of her, because of the baby. I want to know if it's true." Out of the mouths of children came the questions adults were too polite to ask. Ethan looked down at the small face tilted up toward his, so serious, so ready to accept whatever truth he told her. "Her name was Catherine," he said slowly, "and she was the kind of person who made everything better just by being in the room. She laughed loud, talked louder, never met a stranger. When she died, it felt like the world lost its color." "And the baby?" "We named her Rose. She lived for 1 hour." His voice went rough. "Catherine died of fever a day later. I buried them together on the hill behind the house." Lily May processed this solemnly. "Do you go there? To the hill?" "Not in 5 years. Couldn't bear it." "But you could bear me." It wasn't a question exactly, more like she was working through a puzzle. Ethan tried to find the right words to explain something he barely understood himself. "You're not a replacement," he said finally. You're proof that I can still care about something, that grief doesn't have to be the end. Catherine would have loved you, would have fought for you just like I'm fighting. So no, you're not here because of her. You're here because of you, because you needed someone, and I could be that someone." Lily May was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If the judge says I have to go, will you visit me?" "There's not going to be..." "But if..." Her voice was small but insistent. "If he says go, will you come see me? So I know you didn't forget?" Ethan's throat closed. "I'm not going to let them take you." "You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Adults promise things they can't control, then they break. Then kids learn not to believe." "I don't want to not believe you." The wisdom in those words coming from a 3-year-old nearly destroyed him. She was right. He couldn't promise, couldn't control what a judge decided. All he could offer was intention, and she was already smart enough to know that intention and outcome weren't the same thing. "If the worst happens," he said carefully, "if the judge makes a decision I can't change, I will move heaven and earth to stay in your life. I'll visit, I'll write, I'll fight to get you back, I won't abandon you. That's not a promise about what happens tomorrow. It's a promise about who I am. Can you accept that?" Lily May studied his face for a long time. Then she nodded slowly and tucked herself more firmly against his side. "Okay." They stayed like that until the sky began to lighten, until Margaret came downstairs and found them both asleep in the chair, the child's hand still gripping the pocket watch, the man's arm still wrapped protectively around her. She covered them with a quilt and went to make coffee, because morning was coming whether they were ready or not, and in a few hours they would know their fate. The ride to town felt different in daylight. Yesterday they'd traveled with purpose, with the energy of people preparing for battle. Today they moved like condemned prisoners being transported to execution, each mile bringing them closer to a verdict they couldn't control. Lily May sat between Ethan and Margaret on the wagon seat, silent and pale. She'd dressed herself this morning in the blue dress, had brushed her own hair, had eaten 3 bites of breakfast before her stomach refused more. The pocket watch hung around her neck on a piece of string Margaret had found, ticking against her small chest with metronomic certainty. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Apparently, the entire town planned to witness the conclusion of the drama. People lined the hallway, whispering behind hands, staring with curiosity that felt like judgment. Lily May pressed closer to Ethan's leg, and he rested his hand on her shoulder as they walked through the gauntlet. Chen met them inside, his face giving nothing away. "Judge Blackwell is reviewing his notes. We'll be called in soon." "Any indication which way he's leaning?" Margaret asked quietly. "None. Blackwell's known for keeping his deliberations private. Could go either way." Chen looked down at Lily May. "How are you holding up, little one?" She didn't answer, just stared at him with those enormous eyes. "She didn't sleep," Ethan said. "Neither did I," Chen admitted. "This is the part I hate. The waiting, the not knowing." He checked his watch. 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes stretched like hours. Ethan watched the second hand sweep around the face of the courthouse clock, each tick marking time they couldn't get back. Beside him, Lily May stood perfectly still, the kind of stillness that came from children who'd learned that movement drew attention, and attention brought pain. Finally, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Blackwell." The room stood as the judge entered and took his seat. He looked older today, Ethan thought. Tired, like the weight of the decision he was about to render had aged him overnight. "Please be seated," Blackwell said. The room rustled as people sat. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented in the matter of custody for the minor child known as Lily May. This has not been an easy decision." Ethan felt Lily May's hand slip into his. Her fingers were ice cold. "On one hand," the judge continued, "we have Mrs. Dorothy Lang, a respected member of the community with considerable resources and a stated desire to provide proper education and female guidance to orphan children. Her credentials are impeccable. Her intentions appear genuine. The argument that a young girl requires female influence during her formative years is not without merit." Ethan's heart sank. This was it. They'd lost. "However," Blackwell said, and the word hung in the air like a lifeline, "credentials and intentions must be weighed against reality. And the reality is this: the child in question was failing in the institutional care that now claims to want her back. Medical evidence shows extensive abuse, malnutrition, and neglect during her time at the territorial home. In contrast, her physical and psychological condition has improved dramatically in Mr. Cole's care." The judge looked directly at Caleb Wright, and his expression hardened. "Mr. Wright, your facility will be subject to a full territorial investigation. The conditions described in Dr. Morrison's report are unacceptable and possibly criminal. You are hereby ordered to provide full access to all children in your care for medical examination within 30 days. Wright's face went white, then red. He started to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back down. Blackwell turned to Dorothy Lang. "Mrs. Lang, while I appreciate your charitable intentions, your proposed institution does not currently exist. I cannot in good conscience remove a child from a stable placement and send her to a theoretical future arrangement." Dorothy's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the argument that Mr. Cole cannot provide adequate care due to his unmarried status is not supported by the evidence. He has Margaret Hale, a woman of proven character and experience, assisting with the child's care. He has demonstrated both the means and the commitment to provide for the child's needs. And most significantly," Blackwell paused, looking at the papers before him, "the child herself has formed an attachment to him. Dr. Morrison's testimony made clear that severing that attachment now would cause psychological harm." Lily May's grip on Ethan's hand tightened to the point of pain. "The court recognizes that this is not a traditional family structure," Blackwell said, "but the law does not require tradition. It requires the best interests of the child. And in this case, those interests are served by stability, safety, and continuity of care." He picked up his gavel. "Custody of the minor child Lily May is hereby granted to Ethan Cole, with provisions for annual reviews to ensure continued adequate care. Adoption proceedings may be initiated immediately if Mr. Cole so chooses. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell. For a moment, absolute silence filled the courtroom. Then chaos erupted. Dorothy Lang was on her feet, her face flushed with outrage. "This is absurd. A single man cannot possibly—" "The decision is made, Mrs. Lang," Blackwell said coldly. "You may file an appeal if you wish, but I assure you the territorial court will uphold my ruling." Caleb Wright was already pushing toward the exit, his lawyer trailing behind, both of them looking like they'd just watched their empire crumble. Hayes gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements, shooting venomous looks at Chen, but Ethan barely noticed any of it. He was looking down at Lily May, who was staring up at him with an expression of stunned disbelief. "We won?" she whispered. "We won," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite control. "I can stay?" "You can stay, forever." You're mine now. Legally. Actually, forever. Lily May's face crumpled. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and threw her arms around his neck with enough force to nearly knock him backward. He caught her, lifted her, held her as she cried into his shoulder, not the silent tears of trauma, but the loud, messy sobs of relief. Margaret was crying too, not bothering to hide it. She wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood there in the middle of the courtroom while people filed past, while Dorothy Lang made angry pronouncements to anyone who would listen, while Chen gathered his papers with a small, satisfied smile. Sarah Henderson stopped on her way out, her eyes wet. "I'm so happy for you," she said. "All of you. That baby belongs with you." "Thank you," Ethan managed, "for everything." She squeezed his arm and moved on. Chen approached, briefcase in hand. "Congratulations. Though I have to say, it was closer than I'd have liked. Blackwell was on the fence until the very end." "What changed his mind?" Margaret asked. "Hard to say for certain, but if I had to guess." Chen looked at Lily May, who had her face buried in Ethan's shoulder. "I think it was her. The way she held on to you during the hearing, the way she watched you when you testified. Kids that young can't fake attachment. He saw that she'd chosen you, and he respected it." "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "With the adoption?" "I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. Should take a few months to finalize, but it's a formality at this point. The hard part's over." Chen extended his hand. "You fought for her. You won. Not many people would have done what you did." Ethan shook his hand. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what makes it remarkable," Chen said. "Now take your daughter home." "Your daughter." The words settled into Ethan's chest like they'd always belonged there. They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant morning sunshine. The crowd had mostly dispersed, though a few people lingered to offer congratulations or simply stare. Ethan ignored them all, focused entirely on getting Lily May to the wagon and starting the journey home. But as they reached the street, a voice stopped them. "Mr. Cole, a word, if you please." Ethan turned to find Caleb Wright standing behind them, his face carefully composed but his eyes burning with rage. "We have nothing to discuss," Ethan said coldly. "Oh, I think we do." Wright's smile was poisonous. "You may have won today, but this isn't over. I have friends in the territorial government, connections. This investigation Blackwell ordered? It won't find anything, and when it doesn't, I'll be filing a formal complaint about your fitness as a guardian. I'll make your life very difficult, Mr. Cole. You and that little—" He didn't get to finish. Ethan handed Lily May to Margaret, took 3 steps forward, and grabbed Wright by the front of his expensive coat. He didn't shake him, didn't yell, just looked into the man's eyes with an expression that promised violence if necessary. "You listen to me very carefully," Ethan said, his voice quiet and absolutely lethal. "You go near my daughter again, you so much as speak her name, and I will end you. Not legally, not through courts. I will personally see to it that you regret every breath you take. Do you understand me?" Wright's face had gone pale. He tried to pull away, but Ethan's grip was iron. "I asked if you understand." "You're threatening me," Wright managed, "in front of witnesses." "I'm promising you," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference. Now answer the question." I understand." Ethan released him with enough force to send him stumbling backward. "Good. Now get out of my sight." Wright straightened his coat with shaking hands, shot one last venomous look at them all, and hurried away. His lawyer followed, already arguing in low tones about next steps and appeals. Margaret stared at Ethan with wide eyes. "That was necessary," Ethan finished. "Men like Wright only understand one language. Now he knows where I stand." He took Lily May back from Margaret, and they continued to the wagon. As they climbed aboard, Lily May tugged on his sleeve. "What?" he asked. "You called me your daughter," she said softly. "To the mean man, you said, 'my daughter.'" Ethan looked at her. "That's what you are." "But the judge didn't say—" "The judge gave me custody. The adoption will make it official." "But Lily May—" He cupped her small face in his hand. "You became my daughter the moment I took you off that platform. Everything since then has just been the world catching up to what I already knew." Her eyes filled with tears again. "Can I call you Papa?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Papa. The word his own daughter would have said if she'd lived long enough to learn speech. The word he'd thought he'd never hear. Yes, he said, his voice breaking. Yes, you can call me Papa. Lily May smiled then, a real smile, full and bright and absolutely transformative. She threw her arms around his neck again, and this time when she said it, her voice was filled with joy instead of fear. Papa! Margaret wiped her eyes and snapped the reins, turning the wagon toward home. Behind them, Redemption Flats receded into the distance, along with courtrooms and judges and people who thought they knew what was best for a child they'd never bothered to know. Ahead lay the ranch, the mountains, and the future they were going to build together. The ride home was different from the ride there. The tension that had coiled around them for weeks began to unravel, replaced by something lighter. Not quite celebration. The trauma was too recent, the victory too hard won, but relief. Deep, bone-settling relief. Lily May sat between Ethan and Margaret, chattering for the first time since they'd known her. Words tumbled out like she'd been saving them up, questions about everything and nothing. Could she help feed the horses when they got home? Could she learn to gather eggs? Would Margaret teach her to make bread? Could she pick flowers from the meadow? Margaret answered each question with patience and warmth, and Ethan just listened, marveling at the transformation. This was what a safe child sounded like. Curious, energetic, present. When they reached the ranch, Lily May scrambled down from the wagon before it fully stopped and ran toward the house like she was afraid it might have disappeared while they were gone. She threw open the door, ran inside, touched the furniture, the walls, the stove, confirming its reality. It's still here, she called out. Everything's still here. Ethan and Margaret exchanged glances as they followed her inside. Of course it's still here, Margaret said gently. This is your home. It's not going anywhere. But Lily May kept moving through the rooms, touching things, naming them. Table, chairs, stove, my bed, my room. Each word was an anchor tying her to this place, making it real. Finally, she stopped in front of Ethan, slightly out of breath, her face flushed. Can we go see her? See who, baby? Your wife. And the baby. Rose. She said the name carefully, like it was precious. You said they're on the hill. Can we go? Ethan felt his chest tighten. 5 years. 5 years he'd avoided that hill, unable to face the graves and the memories and the loss. But Lily May was looking at him with such earnest hope, such a desire to understand the pieces of him, that he found himself nodding. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, we can go. Margaret offered to come with them, but Ethan shook his head. This is something I need to do with her, just us. So they walked together up the hill behind the house, through the tall grass that had grown wild over the years, toward the 2 white crosses that stood against the sky. Ethan's steps slowed as they approached, his heart hammering, but Lily May's small hand in his kept him moving forward. The graves were simpler than he remembered, just crosses and stones with names carved deep. Catherine Cole, beloved wife. Rose Cole, beloved daughter. One day of life, forever of love. Lily May stood silent, reading the words slowly. One day, she said finally. That's not very long. No, Ethan agreed. It's not. But you still love her, even though she only lived 1 day. Yes, Lily May processed this. Then love doesn't need long to be real. The wisdom in that statement made Ethan's throat close. No, sweetheart, it doesn't. She reached up and it took his hand, not pulling, just holding. Are you sad we came here? I thought I would be, Ethan admitted. But I'm not. Not anymore. Why not? He looked down at her, this fierce little girl who'd survived hell and come out fighting. Because I'm not coming here alone this time. And that makes all the difference. They stood there for a while in comfortable silence. Then Lily May said, Can I talk to them? Of course. She stepped forward and knelt in the grass, her hand resting on Catherine's stone. Hello, she said formally. My name is Lily May. I'm going to be your husband's daughter now. The judge said so today. She paused, thinking. Margaret says you would have liked me. I hope that's true. I promise I'll take good care of him. He's very sad sometimes, but I think I can help with that. And I'll try to be good. I'm learning how. She moved to Rose's smaller stone. And you're going to be my sister. I never had a sister before. I would have liked to meet you. Her voice got smaller. I'm sorry you only got one day. That's not fair. But Papa says you're still loved, so maybe that helps. She stood, brushed grass from her dress, and returned to Ethan. Okay, I'm ready to go now. They walked back down the hill together, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer owned him, no longer defined every breath he took. Catherine and Rose were part of his story, but they weren't the end of it. Lily May was the continuation, the proof that life could surprise you, that love could find you even when you'd stopped looking for it. When they reached the house, Margaret had dinner ready. A feast to celebrate, she announced. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits, apple pie. Lily May ate until she couldn't eat another bite, then fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. Ethan carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed. She stirred slightly, her hand reaching out instinctively. Papa? I'm here. You won't leave? Never. She smiled in her sleep and settled deeper into the blankets. Ethan stood watching her for a long moment, this child who'd changed everything, who'd pulled him back into the world of the living. Downstairs, Margaret had cleaned up and was preparing to head to her own small house on the property. She's going to be fine, she said. Better than fine. She's going to thrive. Because of you, Ethan said. I couldn't have done this without you. You'd have found a way. That's who you are. Margaret pulled on her shawl. Get some sleep, Ethan. You've earned it. After she left, Ethan walked through the house, turning down lamps, checking locks, doing the small domestic tasks that anchored the end of a day. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but somehow different. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt like a home. He climbed the stairs quietly and paused outside Lily May's door. Through the gap, he could see her small form under the quilts, the pocket watch on her bedside table, no longer needed as insurance against abandonment. Tomorrow, Chen would start the adoption paperwork. Tomorrow, they'd begin the slow work of building a real life together. Tomorrow, there would be challenges and setbacks and moments when the past tried to claim them both. But tonight, they had won. They had fought against a system designed to break vulnerable people, and they had won. A broken man and a broken child had found each other and decided that broken pieces could still build something whole. Ethan went to his own room and slept deeply for the first time in 5 years, and the house settled around them like a blessing, keeping watch while they both finally rested. Morning would bring new beginnings. But for now there was just peace, hard-won and precious, wrapping around them like Montana sunshine, warm and golden and real. The investigation into the territorial home began 3 weeks after the hearing, and what it uncovered made even the hardened territorial marshals sick to their stomachs. 23 children had been living in conditions that violated every standard of human decency. Basement rooms with no windows, inadequate food, medical neglect so severe that 2 children required immediate hospitalization, and evidence of systematic abuse that went far beyond what even Doc Morrison had documented. Caleb Wright was arrested on a Tuesday morning, dragged from his office in chains, while reporters from 3 territories watched. His protests of innocence lasted until the marshals showed him the financial records they'd seized, detailed ledgers showing children being rented out to work farms and private homes, with Wright pocketing the payments. Evidence of worse crimes, darker transactions, lay in coded entries that would take months to fully unravel. The trial was swift. Montana Territory didn't tolerate crimes against children, and the evidence was overwhelming. Wright was sentenced to 20 years hard labor in the territorial prison, and the whispers around town suggested he wouldn't survive the first year. Prisoners had their own justice system, and men who hurt children rarely fared well. Dorothy Lang faced no criminal charges, but her social standing crumbled overnight. Her charitable institution never materialized. Her friends quietly distanced themselves. She left Redemption Flat 6 months after the hearing, moving east where nobody knew her story. Some said she remarried. Others said she died alone. Ethan never asked and didn't care. What mattered was that 23 children were removed from hell and placed in homes that actually wanted them. Sarah and Bill Henderson took in two siblings, a boy and girl who'd been at the territorial home for 3 years. Other families stepped forward, motivated by conscience or compassion or simple human decency. One child remained unclaimed. A 5-year-old boy named Jonah with burn scars on his arms and a stutter that made speech almost impossible. He'd been at the home since infancy, abandoned by parents nobody could trace. He was small for his age, prone to violent nightmares, and so withdrawn that he barely seemed present in his own body. Nobody wanted him. Too damaged, they said. Too difficult. Better to send him to another institution, somewhere equipped to handle such cases. Lily May had other ideas. She'd been thriving in the months since the hearing. The nightmares had decreased to once or twice a week. Her vocabulary had exploded as she made up for lost time, asking questions about everything, narrating her days in a constant stream of observation and wonder. She'd gained 12 pounds, and her face had lost that hollow, hunted look. The adoption had been finalized in November, on a cold, clear day when the first snow was falling on the mountains. Judge Blackwell himself had performed the ceremony, his stern face softening as he declared Lily May officially and legally a Cole. She'd worn a new dress Margaret had sewn, and afterward they'd celebrated with cake at the ranch while she practiced writing her new name over and over, Lily May Cole. Now it was early spring, and she'd accompanied Ethan to town for supplies when they'd passed the temporary shelter where the remaining territorial home children were being housed. Jonah had been sitting on the steps, alone, his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. Lily May had stopped walking, just stopped dead in the street and stared at him. "That boy," she said. "Why's he alone?" "I don't know, baby," Ethan had answered, probably waiting for someone. But she'd kept staring, and something in her face made Ethan's chest tighten. Recognition, not of the specific child, but of what he represented. The isolation, the abandonment, the absolute certainty that nobody was coming. 3 days later, she'd brought it up at dinner. "Papa, the boy at the shelter, Jonah, nobody wants him." Ethan and Margaret exchanged glances. "How do you know his name?" "I asked Mrs. Henderson. She said he's been there longest, said he's got problems." Lily May pushed food around her plate. "What kind of problems?" "I don't know the details," Ethan said carefully. "But sometimes children who've been hurt very badly need special care, special patience." "Like me?" "Like you were, yes." Lily May nodded slowly. "And you were patient with me." "Of course I was." "So you could be patient with him too." The direction of the conversation was becoming clear, and Ethan felt his heart rate pick up. "Lily May, he needs a home, Papa. Nobody's going to take him. I can tell. I know what that looks like." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were fierce. "And we have room. We have Margaret and you and me. We could make room for one more." "Sweetheart, taking care of you is one thing, but another child, especially one with significant trauma—" "You mean broken," Lily May interrupted. "Like I was broken. Like you were broken after your wife died. Broken doesn't mean not worth fixing." Margaret made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "She's got you there." Ethan looked at his daughter, his fierce, brilliant, impossibly empathetic daughter, and saw the determination in her face. The same determination he'd seen in the mirror when he'd decided to fight for her custody. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "Thinking's just another way of saying no slowly," Lily May said. "Mrs. Henderson told me that." "Did she now?" "She also said that people who've been saved have a duty to save others when they can, that it's how grace works." Lily May set down her fork. "You saved me, Papa. Now we should save Jonah." The simple logic was irrefutable, and somewhere in the back of Ethan's mind, he realized he'd already made the decision. He'd made it the moment Lily May had stopped in the street and recognized herself in another broken child. 2 weeks later, Jonah came to live at the Cole Ranch. The first days were harder than even Ethan had anticipated. Jonah wouldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't eat unless food was left where he could take it when no one was watching. He hid in corners, under furniture, behind doors. The slightest loud noise sent him into trembling panic. He wet the bed every night and would then try to hide the evidence, terrified of punishment. Margaret handled the practical aspects with the same competence she'd shown with Lily May. Clean clothes, consistent meals, gentle routines. But it was Lily May who reached him in ways the adults couldn't. She understood his language, the language of trauma. She knew why he hid food in his pockets, so she gave him a box for his room where he could keep supplies without anyone questioning it. She knew why he flinched from sudden movements, so she made sure to walk heavily so he always heard her coming. She knew why he tested boundaries, pushing to see when the kindness would end, so she stayed patient through his small acts of defiance. And slowly, incrementally, Jonah began to emerge. The first word he spoke was to Lily May, 3 weeks after his arrival. She'd been reading, or pretending to read, making up stories from the pictures in a book. And he'd been sitting across the room, watching with the intensity of someone memorizing an escape route. What's that?" he'd stammered, pointing to an illustration of a horse. Lily May had looked up, careful to keep her expression neutral. "Thunder." "Well, not this thunder. Our thunder. But they look the same, don't they?" Your horse?" "Papa's horse, but kind of mine, too. Want to meet her?" The terror in Jonah's face at the suggestion of going outside, of meeting a large animal, was immediate, but Lily May had simply returned to her book and said, "That's okay. She'll be here when you're ready." 2 days later, Jonah had appeared in the kitchen while Lily May was helping Margaret make bread and asked to see Thunder. Lily May had grabbed his hand without hesitation and led him to the barn, chattering the whole way about how gentle Thunder was, how she loved carrots, how her favorite spot to be scratched was right behind her ears. Ethan, watching from the house, had felt his throat close as he witnessed his daughter teaching another broken child that the world could be kind, that not all adults hurt, that home was a real thing you could trust. By summer, Jonah was speaking in full sentences, though the stutter remained when he was nervous. He followed Ethan around the ranch like a shadow, learning to care for horses, mend fences, read the weather in the sky. He called Ethan Sir at first, then Mr. Cole, and eventually, after much encouragement, simply Pa. The adoption was finalized in August, on a day so hot that even the grasshoppers seemed to move in slow motion. Jonah Samuel Cole. The boy who nobody wanted now had a family, a name, and a future. That evening, with both children finally asleep after a day of celebration, Ethan stood on the porch with Margaret and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Never thought I'd see this," Margaret said quietly. "This house full of life again. Children laughing. A real family." "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. 5 years ago, I thought I was done. Thought the best parts of my life were buried on that hill. And now? Now I know that life doesn't end just because you think it should. It finds ways to continue, to surprise you." He looked at Margaret. "Thank you. For everything. For staying when I was more ghost than man. For believing I could do this." "You didn't need me to believe in you," Margaret said. "You just needed someone to remind you how to believe in yourself." She squeezed his arm. "Those children are lucky to have you." "No," Ethan said. "I'm lucky to have them." The years that followed were not without challenges. Lily May had nightmares that would probably never fully disappear, moments when the past reached out and grabbed her. Jonah struggled with trust, with anger, with the fear that safety was temporary. There were difficult days, setbacks, moments when Ethan questioned whether he was doing enough. But there were more good days than bad. Days when both children raced each other to the barn, shrieking with laughter. Days when they helped Margaret in the kitchen, making more mess than food. Days when they sat on the porch in the evening and Ethan told stories about Catherine and Rose, teaching them that remembering the dead didn't mean forgetting to live. Lily May grew into a force of nature. She learned to read voraciously, devouring every book she could find. She developed a passion for justice that manifested in fierce protection of anything vulnerable. When she was 12, she started a school program for children who'd been orphaned or abandoned, teaching them to read and write. When she was 16, she testified before the territorial legislature about reforms to the orphan system, her words so powerful that grown men wept. Jonah became a builder, literally. He apprenticed with a carpenter in town and discovered he had a gift for creating spaces that felt safe. He designed homes with wide windows and sturdy locks, with rooms that had multiple exits and hiding places that were optional rather than necessary. He built to heal the trauma architecture could inflict, and people came from 3 territories to hire him. Both children eventually married, had children of their own, built lives that honored the second chances they'd been given. But they never forgot where they came from, never forgot the debt they owed to a broken man who'd chosen to save them when saving himself seemed impossible. Ethan watched it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd gotten more than he deserved. He grew old slowly, his hair turning silver, his body wearing down from years of ranch work. But his mind stayed sharp, and his heart stayed full. Margaret passed first, in her sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family she'd helped build. They buried her on the hill beside Catherine and Rose, and Ethan knew she'd have approved. She'd always said family was about choice, not blood, and this hill held all the people he'd chosen to love. On his 80th birthday, Ethan sat on the porch and watched his grandchildren play in the yard. 6 in total, ranging from 3 to 14, all bearing the Cole name or carrying it in their hearts. Lily Mae sat beside him, her own hair starting to show threads of silver, her face still fierce when defending those she loved. "You did good, Papa," she said quietly. "Look at all this, all these people who exist because you made one choice on one hot day." "We made that choice," Ethan corrected. "You chose to trust me. That was just as important." "I was 3. I didn't know what I was choosing." "You chose to believe that someone could be kind. That's everything." He squeezed her hand. "And you chose to pass that forward. Jonah, all those children you helped. That's not me. That's you." "It's all of us," Lily Mae said. "That's how it works. One person saves another, and that person saves someone else, and eventually you build something bigger than any one life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. In the yard, one of the grandchildren, Jonah's youngest, a girl named Catherine Rose, fell and scraped her knee. She ran crying to her grandfather, who scooped her up with practiced ease and checked the damage with gentle hands. "Does it hurt bad?" Jonah asked. Catherine Rose sniffled and nodded. "I know it does. But here's the thing about hurt. It doesn't last forever. We'll clean it up, put a bandage on it, and tomorrow it'll feel better. Hurt is temporary. Healing is what lasts." The little girl seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly and ran back to play, the crisis forgotten. Ethan smiled. "He learned that from you, that speech about healing." "Maybe," Lily Mae said, "or maybe he learned it from living it, same as I did." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Ethan walked up the hill one last time. His legs protested the climb. His breath came harder than it used to, but he made it to the top. 4 graves now: Catherine, Rose, Margaret, and soon, he knew, there would be a 5th. He sat down in the grass between Catherine and Margaret, his back against Catherine's headstone, and looked out over the ranch. Lights glowed in the windows of the house. Lily Mae and her family were staying the night, and he could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Life. Continuing. "I did it," he said to the graves, to the women who'd shaped him. "I know you can't hear me, but I need to say it anyway. I did what you would have wanted, Catherine. I loved again. I let people in. I built something good." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "And Margaret, you stubborn woman, thank you for not letting me die when I wanted to, for believing I had something left to give." He sat there as the stars emerged, one by one, until the sky was full of light. Somewhere an owl called. The mountains stood eternal against the horizon. The world kept turning, indifferent to individual suffering and joy, but full of moments where both collided and created meaning. When he finally walked back down the hill, Lily Mae was waiting on the porch. "You okay, Papa?" "Better than okay," he said. "Just wanted to say goodnight to some old friends." She helped him up the steps. When had he started needing help with steps? And they went inside together, into warmth and light and the sound of family. Ethan Cole died on a Sunday morning in late autumn in his own bed, with Lily Mae holding one hand and Jonah holding the other. His last words were, "Thank you for choosing me," though neither of his children was sure if he was talking to them or to someone they couldn't see. They buried him on the hill between Catherine and Margaret, and the funeral was attended by more people than Redemption Flats had seen in years. Children he'd never met came to pay respects to the man who'd saved their parents or grandparents. Officials from the territorial government spoke about his impact on orphan reform. Sarah Henderson, now ancient herself, wept openly and told anyone who would listen about the day she'd watched a lonely man save a dying child. But it was Lily May's eulogy that people remembered. She stood at the grave with Jonah beside her, looking out at the sea of faces, and spoke with the same fierce conviction she'd carried since childhood. "My father was not a perfect man," she said. "He was broken by grief, scarred by loss, and carrying wounds that never fully healed. But he made a choice. When he saw someone who needed saving, he saved them. Not because it was easy, not because it made sense, but because it was right. And that one choice changed everything. It changed me. It changed Jonah. It changed every life we've touched since then. One man, one choice, one moment of compassion, and the ripples spread until they touched hundreds of lives. Thousands, maybe. That's not just legacy. That's grace. That's what it means to matter." She placed a hand on the fresh-turned earth. "Thank you, Papa, for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself, for teaching me that broken things can be made whole. I will carry you with me every day for the rest of my life. And when my time comes, I'll make sure someone knows your story. Because stories like yours shouldn't end. They should echo." The crowd dispersed slowly, people lingering to share memories and condolences. Eventually, only Lily May and Jonah remained on the hill, standing between their parents' graves. "You think he knew?" Jonah asked quietly. "How much he changed everything." "I think he knew he tried," Lily May said. "Maybe that was enough." They stood there as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in impossible colors, gold and crimson and shades of purple that had no names. Below them, the ranch spread out in peaceful order. Children played in the yard. Smoke rose from the chimney. Life continued, as it always did, carrying forward the legacy of a broken man who'd chosen love over isolation, courage over fear, and redemption over despair. Lily May reached into her pocket and pulled out an old silver pocket watch, worn smooth by decades of handling. The same watch Ethan had given her that first week, the one she'd clutched as insurance against abandonment. She'd carried it ever since, through everything: marriage, childbirth, loss, triumph. A reminder of the moment when everything changed. She opened it, checked the time out of habit, then closed it again and held it against her heart. "We're going to be okay, Papa," she whispered. "All of us. Because you taught us how." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant snow. The mountains stood eternal. The stars began to emerge. And on a hill in Montana, 5 graves held 5 people who'd formed a family, not through blood, but through choice, sacrifice, and the stubborn insistence that love was stronger than trauma. One man had seen a child who needed saving and decided to save her. That child grew up to save others. Those others saved still more. And the ripples spread outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured, proving that redemption wasn't a destination, but a continuing act of faith. Ethan Cole's story ended on that hill. But the story he'd started, the one about choosing compassion over convenience, about seeing worth in the unwanted, about building families from broken pieces, that story continued. It lived in Lily May's fierce advocacy, in Jonah's healing architecture, in the grandchildren who carried forward the lessons their grandfather had taught. It lived in every person who chose to see someone suffering and decided to help instead of walking past. In every act of kindness that seemed small but created ripples that spread for generations. The child no one wanted became the woman everyone admired. The man who thought his life was over discovered it had barely begun. And together they built something that proved what Ethan had always known but took years to fully understand. We save ourselves by saving others. We heal by helping others heal. And the greatest legacy we can leave is teaching someone else how to be brave enough to love. As darkness fell over the Montana ranch, lights glowed warm in the windows. A family gathered for dinner. Children laughed. Stories were told. And somewhere on the hill, 5 graves stood silent under the stars, holding people who'd learned that the most powerful force in the world wasn't strength or wealth or power. It was one person looking at another person and saying, simply and completely, "You matter. You're worth fighting for. You're not alone." That was Ethan Cole's legacy. That was the story that would echo through generations. And it all began on a hot summer day, on a wooden platform, when a broken man and a broken child found each other and decided that broken pieces could build something beautiful. The end and the beginning.